Welcome to Wild Turkey Science, a podcast made possible by Turkeys for Tomorrow. I'm Dr. Marcus Lashley, Professor of Wildlife Ecology at the University of Florida.
And I'm Dr. Will Goolsby, Professor of Wildlife Ecology and Management at Auburn University. We're both lifelong hunters and devoted scientists who are passionate about hunting, managing, and researching wild turkeys.
In this podcast, we'll explore turkey research, speak to the experts in the field, and address the difficult questions related to wild turkey ecology and management.
Our goal
is to serve as your connection to wild turkey science. All right, so we're back. I see Will over there. Just hanging out. Stoic again. Stoic. That was the word I used last time.
I've been practicing stoicism, reading some Marcus Aurelius.
Yeah. Well, you're having a problem with your camera. You were moving too fast and it won't focus on you.
Yeah, I got to up that shutter speed or that refresh rate. I guess it's video. So
yeah.
I'm excited about this one.
Oh, yeah. You know, we try to let the audience influence what we're talking about, and I would say this topic is one of the number one unresolved topics that we have not really addressed at all, and we continually get questions about it.
Yep.
And I have been really excited, just like you just said, to cover this. So
I just went by, I was doing a little bit of prep work this morning, looking at Duck's LinkedIn, which I see you're very active there, Duck. Just like me. But
what is LinkedIn?
I don't even know. It's like Facebook for work, I guess. Is it okay to be on LinkedIn if you're at work? I think that's how it works. But anyways, but yeah, I went back through some of my emails because I've got a folder I put a lot of the wild turkey science correspondence in.
Mm-hmm.
And I have several in there with people contacting me asking about managing bottomland hardwood systems. And like you said, so many of those are unresolved, or I've, tried to refer them to other people, and I would have referred them all to Duck if I had known Duck at the time. But, without further ado, we're sitting here today with Duck Locascio. I think I got it right. And he is the Forestry Program Manager at the Louisiana Department of Wildlife and Fisheries. Is that correct?
That is correct.
I'm proud of you, Will, for nailing that.
I'm on top of it today.
Polished.
So Duck, would you mind, before we hit the record button, you gave us a really good, kind of background and intro on your career. Would you mind running through some of those highlights again?
Sure.
For the folks that we have listening?
Sure. So, degree at LSU. I enjoyed hunting and fishing far too much to go and get a real job. So after I got my bachelor's in forestry from LSU, I just decided to stay and get a master's in wildlife. So in 97, I graduate with a BS in forestry, master's in wildlife. I'm a forester, I'm a biologist, and I'm looking for a job. And I fell into a job with Louisiana Department of Wildlife and Fisheries. They were looking for a guy who wore both hats because they're in the business of providing wildlife-oriented recreational pursuits on their WMAs, right? It's all about we're in the business of making sure the public is happy with the property that the Department of Wildlife and Fisheries owns. And we own right at 500,000 acres of forested habitat. About 400,000 of that is bottomland hardwood forest habitat. Basically from North Louisiana and Monroe down the Mississippi River all the way to the Gulf of Mexico. We own both large and small WMAs. There's 32 WMAs in the system, and the forestry program with Wildlife Fisheries is in charge of that habitat management. And most of our habitat management is done through forest management. And so in 97, I come on and I get a job with Wildlife and Fisheries, and I'm managing 60,000 acres in Concordia Parish, just adjacent to the Mississippi River, all bottomland hardwood forest. And it's basically my dream job. I'm managing wildlife habitat. I'm hunting turkeys. I'm hunting ducks. I'm hunting deer, and I'm living on the area because it's so remote. There's no phone service and no internet service. And that's where I spent my first 10 years managing that 60,000 acre parcel. And then through through a handful of promotions. Now I manage 26 years later. I've been with the department 26 years. I manage all 500,000 acres, and my passion is basically bottomland hardwood is my passion, and wild turkeys is a close second, and which brings me here today.
So would you put turkeys above ducks?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Really?
So that makes me wonder, is Duck your birth name, or was that a name you earned over time?
No, it's simple. My first name is Donald. So
Okay.
it's a Disney
yeah.
character, basically.
Yeah,
I got you.
I got you.
I'm a junior.
Well,
I'm a junior, and instead of being called Little Donald or Junior, Donald Duck kind of stuck, and then it got shortened to Duck by high school, and now, I mean, no one knows me by anything but Duck. And as far as where turkeys rank for ducks or deer, I mean, my wife knows if turkeys gobbled all year long, we probably wouldn't be married. We wouldn't have children. So yeah, turkeys is number one.
Well, I can empathize with you on that because my middle name is Donald, so I got called Donald Duck a lot growing up. So I know
Really?
exactly how you feel. Well, now it's people Donald Trump, but that's neither here nor there.
Yeah. Well, I've never been called Duck for any reason, and none of my names are Donald. So.
Well, we'll just have to exclude you from this conversation then, Marcus.
Yeah, I'll just sit back and relax.
But
listen to you guys go.
One of the things that I was excited to learn when I was doing a little background research this morning, Duck, is that you were. It looks like you were a part of developing the desired forest conditions with the Lower Mississippi Valley joint venture. Is that right?
Sure was, and yeah, that is correct. And we're actually working on we're editing that document now as we speak. In fact, got a Zoom call at 12 o'clock tomorrow. Kind of finishing up some very final edits before it goes to print. It's kind of a volume 2. It's time. It's always been a very, and we'll discuss the document, I guess, a little bit in general what it is. It was basically the joint venture is Lower Mississippi Valley Joint Venture is they basically deal with management of non-game birds, but the management implications go a little bit further than just birds, and just in very general terms, it's managing towards a very diverse, multi-layered, structurally diverse, very diverse plant community, and whatever silvicultural treatments are needed to get there. That's kind of the goal from a bird perspective, because they're managing so many suites of bird species, right? There's guys that need open, very open mid-stories with closed dark canopies. There's suites of species that need the inverse, early successional habitat, that are very lush, and 0 to 10 foot height vegetation needs to be such that when you stick your arm out, you can't read your watch. If you're talking about Swainson's warbler habitat. So there's a need for very structurally diverse forests, and that lends itself to managing for all the species that we manage for as an agency, right? So I manage for white-tailed deer and wild turkey and woodcock and non-game species. Also, so we need to have as diverse of a forest landscape as we can, which is exactly what non-game birds need, because of the diverse needs that these different suites need. So to bring us to where we are now, it's also, that's the nuts and bolts of what the document was and is. And there's it's guidelines for providing habitat in bottomland hardwood, and there are hard figures that are within that document, but the gist is managing for a real diverse habitat. But it's a living document. We continue to learn. We continue to tweak it based on the latest research, both from the wildlife side and forest management side of things. And that's what this version 2 will be. And it'll be the first one came out, I forget how many pages it was. I mean, if you lay it down on the table, it's an inch thick, and we're trying to condense it to where it's more readable. It was the first iteration was more geared towards academia. But we realized how how just wildlife enthusiasts and habitat enthusiasts and private landowners wanted it so bad. We're trying to make it more digestible and usable for all those different groups, from the practitioner to the landowner to academia.
Yeah, I was telling Marcus just a little while ago that one of the reasons that document resonated with me is I teach a habitat management class here at Auburn, and when I was really, kind of early on in teaching that class for the first time, and I was kind of starting to wrap my head around how I was going to handle the hardwood management section of that class, it's very difficult, right? Because, you think about typical southern yellow pine silviculture and plantation style silviculture is fairly straightforward, right? I mean, that you're going to site prep, you're going to plant at a certain density, and then you're probably going to get a couple of entries into that stand maybe before final harvest. So it's relatively straightforward, what your options are. Whereas with hardwoods, in general, there's a lot more silvicultural techniques that are commonly used. There are a greater number of objectives. Oftentimes, you're doing uneven age forestry as well as even age forestry. And so it's much more complex. And I appreciated that document outlined those desired forest conditions and also built in that flexibility of saying, hey, look, we probably have a third. We can have at any given time a third of our landscape growing into those conditions, a third that are currently in it, and a third that are probably out of those conditions, so that you don't leave the landowner with this perception that everything needs to be perfect all at once. And so, I mean, I think that those are probably we aren't going to spend all the time talking about that document today, but I think that it provides some pretty good sideboards for steering this conversation.
Yeah. And there's two things you just said kind of resonated. Talking about how difficult it is, or how perceived difficulty in managing bottomland hardwood forest. I talk about my career. I say this all the time. For the first 8 to 10 years that I was practicing managing bottomland hardwood forests, I was learning. I was trying to figure it out. It took a decade for me to implement a treatment and see for myself what the results of that treatment were, so that I could then use that information to predict future results if I use a similar treatment, and I learned how to start tweaking it. So it's like first 10 years of my career, I was just trying to figure out what it meant, because I learned a lot in school. I went to a lot of field days and workshops, even while being, in my professional career. But it took 10 years for me to figure it out. It took me the next 10 years to learn how to talk about it. I couldn't sit here and have this conversation in my mid-career, because I knew I knew how to do it, but I couldn't express it. And now I'm in, my last decade working for the department. I'll retire after about 30 years, I'm sure. And now I can finally start expressing what that means, and kind of bringing it back down to a level that it's kind of digestible. So that, you're right. This is a very difficult topic sometimes, but it's you don't have to understand it all. You can just start understanding pieces of it and work. It's like building blocks. And then that's what the document kind of, to talk, just what struck me when you were talking about the document. The document's cool in this regard, and it got a lot of criticism from some folks, and rightly so. But what the document does do, it tries to explain that management for wildlife shouldn't be all at once or all or nothing, right? There's no real one prescription that provides perfect wild turkey habitat. And whenever you treat something, both either it's commercially through timber harvest or TSI work or whatever, oftentimes you're going to provide light that hits the ground. It's going to take time for that plant community to develop, and then it's going to move out of that condition. And you're just trying to, the condition you're prescribing for is kind of that, what happens right before and right after that gradient of time, let's say. So you do have at a landscape level, you will have just what you said. You're going to have a target, and the document specifies it for most disturbance-dependent wildlife species, which turkey are disturbance-dependent wildlife species, forest species. It takes disturbance in the overstory to provide for the habitat that they need for their life history needs. The document simply states that we don't want a closed canopy. We want 60% canopy cover, so 40% light coming through the canopy. But it also says we don't want at any one time any more than about a third of your landscape or your land holding. If you're a private landowner and you have a couple of 100 acres, you want, you got 300 acres, you want about 100 of it in this type of condition where you have 40% sunlight coming through the canopy. And then you want to have a third of your property that has a lot more sunlight than that maybe was recently treated in the last year or two or three. And you might have thinned the canopy down to 50%. And then those crowns are starting to close up a bit. And then on the flip side, you want a third of your property to have kind of be moving out of that desired condition, because that's going to provide a whole different type of habitat, different light gradient coming through. It's going to be a little bit more shaded. And then once it gets a little too far along and becomes dark forest, then it's time to move back in and treat it again. So you kind of think of it in stages, maybe 3 stages, a third, and you know what the target is. Well, then all of a sudden, talking habitat management and bottomland hardwood forestry is a little bit more palatable, I guess.
Yeah, I was looking at the document. I think you touched on a few things. One, we'll link this so that people can get access to it, and I assume when the newer one is available, then maybe we can link that one in the future at some point. But turkeys aren't one of the species that's focused on in there, but I think you made an important point that a lot of the recommendations for some of the groups of species that are focal species are definitely relevant to turkeys. So I think that's one important point for the audience. Just because they search find turkey and don't find that specifically doesn't make it irrelevant. There's a lot of great information in there, and I had not visited that document in quite a while. So going back and looking at it, I now see how it's laid out really nicely for people to review that. So I guess one of my questions while I was listening to you talk, I started thinking about my experience working in upland hardwoods, and I would say most of the questions I get are kind of framed this way. What are some challenges when you are working in that bottomland hardwood context that people are going to, if they were interested in trying to do things like you were just talking about, with the forest disturbance, what are the barriers that they're going to experience, or the troubles, I guess?
Can I back us up a little bit before that one? And I think this question will easily parlay into that one.
Sure, Will.
I appreciate it, co-host Marcus. What are the number one issues for turkeys that you commonly encounter in bottomland hardwood forests? Just the typical bottomland hardwood forest that you start working in.
Yeah, 2 things. I mean, one is controllable and one is not. And the one that's not controllable is annual flooding. So most bottomland hardwood forests get annual floods. And when you get too many high waters in the spring and you get a couple of 2 or 3 years of low production, you can be out of turkeys pretty quick. It's uncontrollable. You can combat it a bit to where, make sure your highest ground is the best habitat you can imagine, but it's uncontrollable. But knee jerk, that's the first thing that comes to mind, and I'd be remiss not to mention flooding, because it's something you have to be cognizant of. The second thing would be closed canopy forests. Most, and it doesn't matter if it's a state-owned wildlife management area or a federal-owned refuge or private land, and the majority of the Mississippi Louisville Valley is privately owned. Most folks, they love their hardwood, and historically, through the 20s, from the 20s to the 60s, we went through a clear gut clear cut and convert to agriculture period. And then of the remaining bottomland hardwood, through the 40s and 50s and 60s, we went through a kind of a time period where it was high graded, a little heavier than it is now. And folks who own those properties mostly own them for wildlife recreation these days. And they love their trees, and they want to see big trees, especially big oak trees and big sweet pecans. And they don't want to harvest timber, and they don't want to kill a tree. And I guess that's the number one problem I see is closed canopy, dark forest. And turkey hunters are the worst to me. Turkey hunters are the worst about it. They think about what they want the woods to look like in the springtime, and how they want to watch a turkey struck from 300 yards out all the way into to their setup. That's really poor wild turkey habitat if you can see 300 yards through the woods. And a lot of folks, in their mind's eye, they want that park-like hardwood setting, just big trees and leaves, and they think that's turkey habitat.
So when you're saying the closed canopy, that's just basically the limitation of sunlight is limiting structure. Do you see that? I mean, is that a strictly limiting nesting and brooding cover, or are you thinking of other aspects of their biology as well?
No, I mean, and when I think of turkeys, as far as what's limited across the landscape, it's basically those two things: brood cover and nest and cover. Mm-hmm. It's a turkey can make a pretty good living most anywhere. I forget what biologist told me this, and he might have stole it from someone, that you would know who coined this phrase. But I've always heard, and I know because I've looked at enough crops to know. I mean, turkey food is anything slow enough that they can catch and small enough that they can swallow. I try to upset all my turkey hunting friends by saying it's just they're feathered raccoons. They're totally omnivorous. They're going to make a living. When it comes to, you don't have to worry about feeding the turkey. He'll find something.
Well, we told you we had a friendly audience, but I don't know if they're going to let you slide on that comment.
Well, I did that to wake them up. But what I think about when my objective is wild turkey habitat, I enter a stand, and that is my number one objective. The first thing is always brood cover. To me, in bottomland hardwood forests, you're talking about vegetation 0 to 15, 16, 17 inches, about knee-high vegetation, not too thick. You don't want a blanketed dewberry, but little dewberry, little greenbrier, little climbing dogbane, trumpet creeper, just a nice, diverse understory, knee-high, and what that provides is it's a place for poults to work through that vegetation, making a living, but a hen standing up taller than that, and she can see any type of predation, that event that may be about to happen, which for a turkey that's almost every couple of minutes. And that's what I'm trying to provide. And then the other thing that's absent, which you would really love to have in close proximity to that habitat, would be escape cover or nesting habitat. That's, to me, it's the same, right? When she's nesting, it's nesting habitat, and that's going to be some more early sessional habitat with a lot of sunlight coming through, but small patches of this across the landscape, not one big 60-acre clear cut that has a lot of light coming through, right? But small gaps within that canopy, within that forest, and then that also becomes escape cover. So when she has her brood, and she putts because a Cooper's hawk dropped below canopy, they have somewhere to go to. And so those are the two things that are most limited. Across the Mississippi Valley, you have one of two things. You have closed canopy, if it's in forest and it's not in agriculture, you either have closed canopy forest, which are big and pretty and clean, or something that's been clear cut or picked over pretty hard. where most all the merchantable saw timber has been removed, and you're left with pulpwood size stems. They could be old, young. It's not, small trees aren't young. Just small trees are small trees. They may be old too, but smaller diameter trees of lower value that it's been picked over time and time again. And so that's kind of the two things you end up with. And neither of those is really good wild turkey habitat.
Am I okay to ask a question now, Will?
I'll
Yeah.
allow it.
Well, Duck, thanks for going through that. From my experience, right in line with what I see.
Mm-hmm.
What I usually get when I'm talking to people in terms of questions, or how do I get this done? Like, they don't know what to do in that context. Like, can they get a logger in there to cut trees? Like those kinds of questions. So that's kind of what inspired me to ask that 20 minutes ago when Will changed the subject.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'll quickly tell you those challenges, and they're real challenges. We depending on where you are in the Southeast, and I know this audience stretches from the Atlantic to possibly the Pacific, but definitely at least to East Texas. If there's a high demand for pulpwood products in the local area, then managing forests for wildlife habitat, because oftentimes we're not, I don't want to say never, because, and we'll get into silvicultural treatments, but we're generally not clear cutting. We're not doing 20 to 40 acre clear cuts across a property. We're doing something else. We're thinning. Think of it like you're thinning your tomato garden. We're thinning to allow some amount of light, whatever amount of light we prescribe for the habitat we need. So we're going to thin trees. And when we're thinning trees, it means we're cutting fewer than all of them, right? A lower stem count per acre. And when there's a hardwood pulpwood market in your area, then that's very doable. But if there's not a hardwood pulpwood market, then it may not only be limiting it, you may not be able to do it with the commercial harvest. I'm fortunate in the state of Louisiana, at least we are in, Southeast Arkansas, western side of Mississippi, and most of Louisiana. We have a decent hardwood pulpwood market. We have a pretty good hardwood saw timber market. And we can move hardwood pulpwood, meaning we can sell it. At almost any acreage, you can't get crazy and sell 10 acres, but you can have a 30, 40, 50 acre thinning sale, and you may not get top dollar, but you can get somebody to come harvest it. There are areas within all three of those states where the distance to the mill is a little bit too far to where that may not be an option. And then when you're talking about small landowners who have very small parcels, it may not be an option. Commercial harvested timber, I think that should always be the number one option if you can pull it off, because you can have the most effect on the landscape by having someone bring in heavy equipment at no cost to you to manipulate your forest. And then if you make a little money, all the better, right? So that's one of the hurdles and challenges, and you just have to know locally what demand there is for the product that you have. And then the other hurdles can be like I talked about, flooding, wet weather, bottomland hardwood systems generally between floods and rain, they stay wet and soft. So it's hard to get heavy equipment in all year. For the most part, there's a pretty short window to where you can have some type of commercial treatment with heavy equipment, and it's generally going to be in very late summer through fall, which is our lowest annual our rainfall annually. So you're looking at September and October and early November. That's bread and butter time, and by Thanksgiving the rain set in and you're out of business again. So that answers your direct question, and then but the solution is you don't always have to do it commercially, and you can do it using herbicide, You can also do it. I've seen it done on a few private jobs, and we're actually doing it on a few state WMAs. But actually, you can sometimes a cutter, a shear, a large piece of equipment can move around, even if it's a little bit soft, and do cutting for you. But you couldn't expect to drag those stems to a deck, have them loaded on trucks and carried out. The ground wouldn't hold up for skid traffic and heavy truck traffic in the woods. So in more remote areas, small land, small parcels, if you didn't want to just use herbicide, because herbicide, the tree's left standing. If you wanted kind of immediate treatment, you can pay for services where heavy equipment will come in, like a fella buncher, and do whatever you want in any arrangement you want at whatever. If you want to thin heavy, thin light, most operators will do whatever you ask at a price, and that price is around right now $160 to $180 an acre. Just the sky's the limit, however you dream it up. And most of the time, this is when they're not logging. If they don't have a job and they need something to do for a week or two, someone will be happy to run their Hydra-Ax at those prices. So, and then herbicide is about the same thing. Y'all probably know. You're looking at any $80 on the low end to maybe $150 on the high end herbicide treatments. So the price is comparable. So those are the two other options. But it's all about removing or killing stems to remove a crown, to provide sunlight to come through the canopy, to provide the plant community you want in the understory or midstory.
Okay.
So let's say you've got a situation where you come from a closed canopy forest, you open that canopy up, you get 40% sunlight coming in, to use your earlier example. You get some vegetation development. Now, what are your options from there in bottomland hardwood forest, and maybe like compare and contrast to upland? It doesn't have to be upland hardwood, but even upland pine. Like, how is getting disturbance like fire in that system different?
Yeah, so
I would presume that'd be another challenge just because of the moisture regime.
It's a very similar question to what I was going to ask.
Yeah, fire and we use fire in all of our pine stands, and fire has a place in upland hardwood. Unfortunately, fire in bottomland hardwood, not that it is going to hurt stems, you just won't get it to carry.
Right.
You're dealing with species that they did not evolve with a system of fire. They're some of them are a little fire tolerant, and some of them aren't. But just the way the leaves mat down, just the way the ground stays so moist so much of the year, you're probably not going to carry fire. For a quick example, this year 2023 is about as dry as it's been maybe since that 99 drought in the MAV. And we had 3 fires on a 70,000 acre tract, bottomland hardwood tract. We had 3 separate fires. It was probably had to do maybe lightning, maybe squirrel season and cigarettes. But one burned for 2 days, one burned for a week. I can't remember the third one. But the most it consumed, the one that burned for a week consumed 11 acres. That's how slow it just kind of smoldered along. I let it go because I wanted to see what it might do. I wasn't hurting anything. Flame height was literally less than 3 inches. But so you're just not going to carry fire. Right. Now, however, flooding does set back succession kind of like fire does. And when you get timed flooding, sometimes we enjoy it. When it comes every spring, we start getting flooding gets a little old, but it affects the understory a lot like fire does by starting succession over in that plant community. But without sunlight coming through the canopy, it doesn't matter if you could get fire in the system or not, or if flooding is going to set it back naturally or not. If you don't have canopy gaps, you're not getting much done.
Yeah, what I tell my class is sunlight is limiting first. So if you don't relax that limitation, you can't expect much from other strategies like fire flooding.
Mm-hmm.
You keyed in on one of the I guess the follow up I was gonna to ask you directly was if you're in a situation and you do open up the canopy and get sunlight in and you can't use fire. I have seen a few examples, and all of them I was in the MAV when I saw it, where that periodic flooding seems to give you a pretty similar result in terms of just setting back succession, or at least keeping the vegetation structure and the understory, as opposed to allowing it to regenerate into the midstory or on. Is that accurate? I mean, do you think?
Yes,
That
it's accurate. And then other things to think about. Of course, for an individual landowner, he's not dealing with being in different areas within the MAV. But all sites respond a little differently to a treatment. So if you were to open up the canopy, there are some sites on really heavy clay soils, which are very rich soils, right? That's where we plant soybeans. But those soils tend to respond not quite as quickly as maybe a second bottom, getting a little further from the river, like on some commerce soil or something. So you kind of have to know where you are in the I keep on saying Mississippi River Valley, but it doesn't matter. Any large drainage throughout the southeastern United States that has bottomland hardwood forests, you're going to have anywhere from heavy clays to loamy soils. The further you move away, and you get on a little bit better soils and a little higher elevation, you get quicker and more response from a canopy treatment than you do when you're closer to that water course, minus that first ridge. I hate to get all up in the weeds about this. We can get very complex quickly, and I promise that I knew how to explain this stuff in my last decade of my career. But I guess we got ahead of ourselves just a bit talking about. So we've opened up the canopy and allowed 40% sunlight. I don't recommend just walk into a stand and open a canopy just cause, right? It's always going to be for a reason, and where we do it is normally there's a reason why it's done in a certain spot within that stand. And I guess that's a really important point, because we know what our main objective is, right? For these land holdings, and there's many objectives, and you can manage timber for pure saw timber production, and you can manage timber for aesthetics. It runs the gamut. We're talking about managing bottomland hardwood forests for wild turkeys and associated wildlife. If that's the objective, I guess to start, the first thing would be some type of general evaluation of the property. What's that habitat look like? It might be in great condition. And then once you get a general feel of whatever size parcel that is, and I do a lot of private land outreach type stuff and do workshops on folks' property and answer a lot of questions and just do site visits for folks and give them my opinion on maybe the direction they might be able to go. But that's the first thing we do, is just kind of look at the property and see what are we dealing with, because you can only start to treat it and manage for something based on the conditions that you're dealt. You can't turn something that's been high graded for years into just primo wild turkey habitat overnight. Yet maybe you walk into a property and those conditions lend itself to one treatment, one time, and you're good for a decade, and that happens too. And it runs the gamut. So once you kind of evaluate where you are, you try to kind of compartmentalize that property into pieces. That's important because it's when you talk about wild turkeys or any species that we manage for, we want to try not to have a boom bust type cycle. You can make a lot of good habitat all at once, but generally you're going to have it for a few years. Those conditions will change as the vegetation grows, because these are extremely dynamic systems. And then you live with kind of, not so good habitat with no way to manipulate it for a period of time until, generally in case of bottomland hardwood, until that vegetation grows into a product that you can sell again and then get back in there with some type of commercial harvest. If you're paying out of pocket with TSI, maybe you could do something. But in general, we live with the treatment we put on the ground, the decisions we make, right now, we're going to live with for several years when we're managing hardwood, because it's so slow. Pine is quick and kind of cookbook, and we know what's going to happen. And hardwood, it takes longer for things to happen, and then Mother Nature throws a few more monkey wrenches at us oftentimes. But general evaluation, break it up into parcels so that you can start manipulating it and have like a constant flow of habitat. Have conditions, every year that are good. Maybe it's not primo, but it's sustained, just good habitat sustained over time. You can only do that if you kind of schedule your treatments. And then once it's broken up into those pieces, you can evaluate just a small chunk, makes it more manageable, right? Just look at, if you own a couple of 100 acres, just look at 40 and say, all right, so our objective is wild turkeys. This is what it looks like. Here's kind of 1, 2, 3 things that we might be able to do. Maybe we could do all 3. We could diversify it even more. And you go ahead and come up with those objectives and choose methods to meet those objectives. And that's where you start talking about hardwood silviculture, and you start talking about actual techniques, and we can get into those or not. But that's kind of the way you think about things, and to get it moving along.
So a couple of things came to mind. It was just bouncing around in my head. I was thinking through while you were talking. So when you're thinking about, well, let's just say wild turkeys are the main objective, and we're in a landscape, bottomland hardwood dominated, that's mostly closed canopy. So are you thinking of a range in terms of proportion of how much you are leaving in that condition versus what you are assigning to other stand management schemes to meet other habitat requirements? I know I'm not. Yeah, I guess I'm kind of asking you to give me a cookbook, but I don't mean it that way. I'm just trying to get a ballpark. And then my follow-up question is, how do you decide, like you were talking about, the differences in soils and elevation, and those things are playing a role. I know they're important. Are there particular types of sites that you're deciding this is going to be the one that we're going to thin in versus the other, or, there are other things influencing that decision, I guess?
Yeah. And, I could go a whole bunch of different ways with just to answer that. So as far as site, it struck me when we were talking about it, because I was just with a landowner not long ago, and he had some pretty low ground. It was mostly willow flats, black willow, and I mean, that would be a site that I wouldn't be too worried about wild turkeys. Will they use it? Absolutely. When water recedes out of those sites, they end up in there in just huge groups, taking advantage of whatever they're taking advantage of, snails and tadpoles and little crawfish and whatever's in there. But I'm not going to try to provide nesting habitat in a willow flat, because I'm setting a turkey up for failure, right? So I guess when it comes to managing wild turkey, and let's just say the properties we're thinking about are diverse enough in elevation that there's different habitat types, and there's kind of slough, willow flat habitat type, and maybe some more ridge swale habitat, maybe one nice high ridge. And in bottomland hardwood, don't think about like upland hardwood. A high ridge for us, like 2 feet, that's Everest. That is super high ridge, 2 feet. A 2 foot change in topography in bottomland hardwood you can go from water hickory to willow oak in just 2 feet. So I guess when I'm always thinking wild turkey when I walk into a forest, it's just because of my passion for wild turkeys. Whether the landowner really cares about them or not, I'm always. So yeah, you're thinking about where you want them. So if you're providing nesting habitat, it's going to be on the higher ground on the property. And we're going to want to provide enough nest and habitat when we prescribe it. We don't want to just make 2 little half-acre patch cuts, because she's going to use it, but every coyote and varmint's going to know it's there too. So it's to have enough of it on that topography or that stand, or, you've deemed that's kind of an important area for turkeys, and we want to provide nest and habitat. Now we need to think about providing enough of it that it doesn't become, a predator trap. And as long as you provide, enough different sizes, spatially, how they're arranged, you don't want a turkey in every little thicket. You want most thickets not to have a turkey in it. And that way predators get a little tired. It just doesn't make it feasible for them to hunt it real quick and find it real quick. So I guess that's the first thing, is make sure you're doing it in the right place. As far as the percentage, if it's all really good and all lends itself to being, you could manage for turkeys, then I kind of think of it in thirds. It's just a way to make it simple in my mind. But it won't always be, that third won't always be nest and habitat, right? So I'll have, maybe a third that's really good brood cover with some dispersed nest and habitat. A third that hasn't been messed with, that's kind of on the chopping block, that I know I can go treat as soon as this third starts moving out of it. And it's going to. That ridge won't always be good wild turkey nesting habitat, because that little, we'll kind of segue into hardwood silviculture. That little patch that you made, or those patches that you made, you probably saw some advanced oak regeneration while you were thinning. And that's why you made a half acre or an acre size group, because you wanted to make nest and habitat. But you also did it there because you saw advanced oak regeneration, little saplings, 3-6 feet tall, maybe some little baby poles, or maybe 12 foot tall or something. And that's why you took the canopy off there. Well, those saplings are going to become trees, and they provide shade. And then the habitat that you provided, that you had for 7 or 8 years, all of a sudden you walk in there and it's just clean as can be, because now you have a stand of gel cell thick water oak that's 4 to 6 inches in diameter and 30 feet tall. Well, that's not nest and habitat anymore, and it's not supposed to be. These systems are supposed to move and evolve. So you need to have, that becomes the third that's moving out of those desired conditions. And that third that you left in reserve, that's where you're going to work and provide that habitat again. And then when you think about it, a career as a land manager, it's just your job to make sure you have each of those thirds out there in the landscape, and you learn from the property you're managing how quickly you need to get back in. You'll start to understand the disturbance regime on the property, and how quick vegetation takes up light that you're providing, so you'll know how quickly you need to get back in. Oftentimes in bottomland hardwoods, you're talking, depending on the site. Good sites, maybe you need to re-enter a stand every 10 years. And on a poorer site, you may be able to wait for 20 years or 25 years if things are just a little slower to move along. Still providing the same structure across those types of sites. It's just, you have to be cognizant in how soon you need to get back in, depending on how the site quality. And then we could go down the rabbit hole of actual silvicultural techniques. I just described thinning, which is individual selection, and a patch that we made to provide for early sessional habitat for escape cover and nesting habitat, and that's group selection, and that's where we start talking forestry terms, but we're using them to describe a habitat that we're trying to provide. But we never lose sight that, or at least I try never to lose sight, and most private landowners wouldn't either. You want to continue growing a product that has a demand. If you can grow nice quality straight trees, then there's a demand for that product. Therefore, you can sell it, get some revenue coming in, and also it opens up your, you know, all your objectives for your property. It just opens up avenues for you to manage that system in different ways. If someone really wants to come and get the product that you're growing, and every time we enter a stand to provide this habitat, we're also trying to improve that stem quality and the timber quality. It just opens up our management options down the road.
Mm-hmm.
Wild Turkey Science is part of the Natural Resources University podcast network and is made possible by Turkeys for Tomorrow, a grassroots organization dedicated to the wild turkey. To learn more about TFT, check out turkeysfortomorrow.org.